I know we have a lot of people that couldn't make tonight. My phone was blowing up with text and calls. There's having a lot of storms, especially around the Dothan area, so I know a lot of folks had stayed in tonight. But that's okay. We have everybody that's supposed to be here tonight. That's all that matters. You're here. So listen, what I thought we would do is, actually I was laying in bed a few nights ago, and I was just praying about some things, and the Lord started showing me things that we've done in the past. And one of the things we used to do quite a bit of, we used to have panel discussions. How many people remember that? And we would put people up, different ones from just, sometimes you just need to hear from different people. And we would bring up topics that people are going through. Real questions about real life. And don't get me wrong, of course, through the word and through preaching, we understand how to do life, but boy, sometimes you just have a question you want to ask. It's very pointed. I remember when I used to go to church, I used to think of that all the time. I used to think, I wish I could just ask a question. I just like to go ask a question right now, but you didn't want to interrupt service. Well, now we're going to let you interrupt service to ask you questions. And we're going to put a panel up there. So what I did is I thought, we've done everything from elders to ministers. So this time I thought, well, we'll just bring some of the ministers up here. And ministers, why don't you guys go ahead and take the stage up there. You can be doing that while I'm giving the rest of the instruction here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have some couples come up to the stage and some different individuals. And we're going to let you ask us some questions. When you're turning on that television set, boy, that TV can lie to you. How many people have been looking in tabloids and newspapers and see those newspapers will lie to you? Try to make you believe things that you know aren't true. And the Bible says, as the days go on, it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. So sometimes you need to hear some truth. I'm not saying everything's a lie, but there's a lot of lies out there. So how do you know the difference? Well, you've got to know the truth. The more truth you know, the less chance the devil has to snare you. And so, is everybody okay tonight? You guys are like way quiet. Is everybody here? Give me a ooh, something. There you go. All right. Now what I'm going to do is we're going to have, JC, did you give me a mic down here? What, you got it down here? Okay, so Nathan has it. So Nate, come over here, and I'm going to let you stand right here in the middle. And here's what we'll do. Listen, tonight we're just going to have a good time. We want to relax. This is family talking with family. We want to talk about some things that families talk about. So there's no question that you can ask that's not going to be appropriate if you need the answer to it. It could be anything from, I even had polled some of the ministers to see what some of the people were talking with them about. We had everything from family to depression. People are going through real problems. Even some questions about kids or, what about this, what about that? Well, we're here to help you. You may have a health question. Whatever it is. We just want to help you because that's what the house of God should be. When we've assembled this group, that's a lot of wisdom represented up on that stage, I want you to know. So, I don't want anybody to be bashful. I don't want anybody to be shy. And if you have a question, who wants to be the first one to ask a question to the panel? Come on up here, Connie. Thank you for being so. Come on out on over here. Line them up. Yeah. So we'll start right here.
Okay, mine has to do with health.
Okay.
I work in the health field. It is ever changing. And how do you suggest educating people who keep taking the traditional route? They're not getting the results that they need to see. How do you begin to educate them on alternatives? I read op reports every day. People having their intestines taken out, having colostomy bags put in. We have a cancer center. They get one chemo treatment. They're in the hospital. They're probably not going to leave. How do you begin the process?
I'm going to step to the front of that question because there are legalities involved there. And here's what I want to tell you. It's the old saying, when you're When in Rome, you have to do as the Romans. Okay, we'll go straight scripture here. And even when Jesus was in a place, he still didn't violate the laws. You know, traditions, different story, but he didn't break laws. And so one of the things that we need to look at is when you're in that arena, there's really nothing you can do to speak to medically because it's medically staffed, and the only recommendations can come from that medical staff. That's number one, and that's the way it is at my clinic. You can't go ask the front girl or the back girl or somebody at my clinic. You can't ask an employee. It has to come from Dr. Mitchell, an example at our clinic. That's just how clinics work, okay? Now, with that understanding, it doesn't mean you can't share the gospel. So what I've found is you can do a lot of things in discussion that you don't have to do by recommendations. I can't tell you how many times that I know people in the same setting you're in that when they see someone, they say, hey, did you happen to see that article? And, you already got your ammunition. And you say, yeah, and just give them the address or whatever it is, or the website, whatever. Say, you might want to check that out. They have some really good information on something. And see, you can guide them in a way, but you're not really making a recommendation. What I found is everyone's looking for the truth, and they really want to get well. And let's face it, a lot of times you go to the, medical doctors and everything gets taken care of. It's not like, medical's bad. I don't want anyone getting that opinion. I don't have that opinion. But what you're talking about, I get it. Sometimes they get caught in a system and they can't get out, when really they need to be doing something more practical instead of trying to do something ancillary on the, in the exterior. So I know what you're pointing to there. So if you feel like you have a truth that you want them to have, of course, we always can talk about our religious freedom because we can still do that in this state. And as long as it's not breaking your office policy, which I doubt it would be, then you can share scriptures and you can share the gospel with them, if you will, and our covenant of healing. But if you want to make other insights about you should be taking this or you shouldn't be taking that, you should be eating this, eating that, you can recommend books. I know a real good one you can recommend. You can recommend books, you can recommend websites, you can recommend articles. There's a million articles out there. And I know people that do this very strategically, even in hospitals, even members that have been partners at this church. They have been strategic in hunting information they need and directing people toward that information. Does that make sense? So you can still operate, how do I say it? I don't ever want to use the word covert because I don't want you to do anything underhanded or under the hat, because that's not how Christians operate. But you can still steer people to the light by just being clever. Does that make sense? Does everyone understand that? Yeah. One thing, and I want to caution everyone, never go against a doctor's order. Like if a doctor tells someone to take that, don't say, no, don't you do that. You don't put yourself in those shoes, because there's actually liabilities there and could be there if you do. Now, if it's your daughter or your family, you do and say what you want to, because you have that kind of option. But in the setting you're in, just remember, if any of you, I don't know if you work for any kind of professional agencies, schools included, if you give advice, you're not just a friend talking. If you're a friend talking, you can say whatever you want to anyone about anyone. But if you're in an office or a public place or you work at the courthouse or something, if you give advice, it is considered legal information and legal advice. So literally, you could get charged of practicing medicine without a license. And that's all I'm just trying to tell you, because the devil's always looking for an inroad there, okay? So that's the reason why I want to jump to the front of that particular question, okay? Thank God that you're educated here, and something as simple as taking sugar out of your diet, and then we could keep you off that diabetic medication. Isn't that wonderful? By the way, can I just share quickly your testimony? Miss Monica, are you okay with that? Yeah, Miss Monica here. I don't have it with me. I was going to actually read the text, but do you want to tell him, Miss Monica? Do you want to tell him your testimony, or do you want me to tell it? Do you want to tell her, or do you want me to tell it? I don't ever want to put you on the spot. You know that. Okay, I'll tell you. So basically, People get given diagnoses, and they have to make choices about what diagnosis. So if there is a promising cure in something, and there's a highest percentage, well, of course, you always have to try to do whatever you can in the highest percentage to win. But when someone wants to do treatments that aren't giving promise, why would you sign up? I've always said that. What are we signing up for if there's no promise there? Just to be doing something? It doesn't make sense, and many times it causes more destruction than it does good. So, Miss Monica has had, was told that she had cancer in her body, and she needed to do these radical treatments and all these things, but the radical treatments didn't promise any cure. So that wouldn't make any sense. So she elected her own not to do that, that she was going to do some more natural ways. Now, sometimes when people say natural, they think that that means lesser treatment or weaker. No, we've been able to steer her in some directions of some pretty strong, if you will, treatments, but they're just natural. And so she just went back to her oncologist, and when they did the PET scan and they brought back her results, he said the way she put it in the text was that for this type of cancer not to have spread is a miracle. It's no change from the last one to this one. It has not progressed any. It's not moving. We call that remission. It's just not moving. And she told her to continue doing whatever it is she's doing because he doesn't understand how that can happen without any kind of radical treatment. So we have choices we can make. And what I always try to do, because people ask me all the time, because I preach, I'm very pointed about some of the treatments that are destructive that I am not in favor of, and I don't back up from any of those. But when a treatment, like, example, when my son was, at 2 days old, I don't like surgery. I want everyone to know in here, I do not like it. It is always the last recourse. But how many people here have ever had to have surgery? My son wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for surgery. Is that my first choice? No. I sought every other option possible, and then that was the only option, and we did the surgery, and my son's still with us. Do you see how it works? But there was a promise of cure, do you see? And there's a remedy to see a fix. When you just want to do something to try it, or, we can do this and, your last few days, or we're going to burn you up or something like that, you really need to drop back sometimes and pray about it and ask the Lord what you want to do. Does that make sense? So you opened up a big topic there, Con, and that's why I did that, because I don't want anyone thinking they need to take their health in their own hands by any means, because that's why we have medically trained physicians, and that's why we're all physicians. You need help steering yourself through some of these conditions. Don't get me wrong. I'm not telling anyone to go just, well, I'm just going to ignore the rest of the world. That would be stupidity. But at the same time, I want you to learn to stand on faith, and I want you to understand that God can heal you from anything. You're looking at a guy right here that hasn't had a medication in his body in over 25 years of any kind, not even an aspirin. So God can and will do it. Okay? All right. Next question. Great question. Come on, somebody. Come up with a question. Or am I going to have to lead you on topics? So nobody here has any questions. There's one. You guys are being bashful.
It's not necessarily a question, because if I asked one question, then that would produce like 500 more questions within that one. So it's more of like a statement that proposes you all to think and then respond. Marriage, he just talked about it on Sunday. It was real good. The Bible talks about marriage. I have a very good understanding that marriage is supposed to represent the love between Christ and the church. And that's very demanding, I believe, because Jesus really loves the church. So if I can have any advice on marriage, anything at all, any one of you, that would be cool.
Who wants to open this up? Go ahead, Dan.
Something that I had to learn about myself was how to talk to my wife, how to not disrespect her with my words, how to show her that she can trust me with her heart. All too often, when heated debates come along, one tries to one up the other, and we forget about loving our spouse the way Christ loves the church because we want to have either the last word or be right, tit for tat, and then you start saying things to one another that hurts each other. And sometimes you do it without realizing it, but the hurt comes about. So what I recommend is before you say anything to your husband to be, or you have to stop, pause, and think. Is what I'm about to say going to bring peace to this situation, peace to my spouse, or could it be potentially harmful, hurtful? Because if things like that escalate, you'll find that he will believe that he can't trust you with his heart. You'll believe that you can't trust him with your heart. And then the disrespect escalates, and the next thing you know, you sleep in different bedrooms. And it escalates some more if you don't check it with the Word of God. Next thing you know, you're sleeping in 2 different households. Everything you say to your spouse needs to be in love and to benefit their health and well-being and their spirit.
I just want to piggyback off that and say this too. Before you get married, you really have a discussion. I mean, right down to how many kids we're going to have, who's going to wash the dishes. I mean, you know, when you go in the bathroom, close that door. I mean, things like that. But we don't have these conversations. And then remember, it's the small fox that spoiled the vine. It's never the big ones, the small things. And we don't have those discussions. And we have to remember when we get married, your weakness is your husband's strength. His weakness is your strength. And we have to call on those things. But it starts with an open conversation. I've learned in 20 years now of marriage that I don't know everything. I know it's a shock, but I don't. And a lot of times my wife has the answer, but because of pride, sometimes I'll miss that answer. So be open and listen. It's a blessing.
For information, I am married. I've been married for over 3 years now. We've just been separated for 1.5 years, so anything's good right now.
God needs one open heart. God needs open heart. If you have an open heart, not saying this is going to work out, I can't tell you that, but God needs open heart. God needs 2 things to work in your life: your permission and your participation. And you have to do some things sometimes you don't want to do. You know.
Bishop talks about identifying the root cause of anything before you can heal it. You have to accept the fact that whatever the cause is of your separation right now, you have to identify that for what it truly is. Don't tiptoe around it. And if you believe that you are part of that root cause, then that's when the pride needs to just go away. Flush it. Admit it. Take that look in the mirror. Filter yourself through the Word of God. And then go from there. And then make your adjustments based on that.
Never, ever be too big to say, I'm sorry. Never be too big to say, I'm sorry, because those 2 words will go miles in a relationship. I mean, miles. My wife and I have been married for 28 years. Thank God. And we have an understanding with one another. We pray for each other. We believe in praying for each other. And I think that's what's held us together for 28 years, is we believe in the Almighty, we believe in prayer, and we believe in saying, I'm sorry. It doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. Sometimes I'm sorry will end an argument. And it doesn't have to be, oh, and by the way, you cannot change him, and he cannot change you. You got to live with each other 100%. Not 50-50, 100-100. Okay?
I don't know your situation, but many times couples, one spouse may be a believer and devoted to God, and the other one may not. And you still pray for them. You pray for them. Before we got to where we are now, I laid in bed at night and just laid my hand on him and prayed. He didn't know I was praying for him. but I was praying for him. And understanding your prayers, don't always pray what you want God to do, because God will work through both of you at the same time. So I don't know, but if that is your situation, it's not impossible if your spouse is not a believer or not where he should be. Just keep on believing and trusting God. And I've had to share with my children before, because everyone, I think, has trouble in their marriages at some point or situations. The first thing I tell my children is, don't think that divorce is your first option, because really it should not be an option, because God can heal anything. The worst of the worst situation, God can intervene. And just because something may have happened doesn't mean it has to continue or will it continue. God can do above and beyond what we can think or imagine. So just understand that and go into it thinking. So many young people go into marriage these days thinking that if it don't work, we can get out of it. But it is a covenant. It is a commitment. And sometimes it's hard, but it is not impossible.
I think that's why it's so hard for me, because I have very stubborn faith, and my husband is a believer. We actually met in Bible college in Tennessee, so that's why it's so hard for me. I'm not indecisive. I know that I want this thing to work, and I do believe God can restore, but it's that in between that I'm just like, some days I'm in and some days I'm out. Some days I'm like, well, God, I give up. You have better. And then the next day I'm like, no, this is what I want. On my inner being, like, what I want is restoration. It's just 1.5 years of hell, so that's been hard.
Can I tell you that your marriage can never fall so far that God can't restore it? But your communication right now in the interim, while you're separate from your husband, should not necessarily be targeted to your husband.
Right.
Because sometimes words spoken to each other are interpreted over your own paradigm and over history, over brokenness, and over other conversations and other arguments. So right now, the most important conversation you can have is with God. In this period of separation, use this time to grow your relationship with God. And remember, this is the only relationship where two people become one. I often say that you share a stomach. You share a stomach. So what you eat, what you take in before God, your relationship at your altar, your husband can't resist it. I'm an example of that. When I was in that situation and almost separate from mine, my wife simply went before the Lord and made a deeper commitment to Him. And somehow, through her commitment to God and her prayers, the Lord began visiting me and actually speaking to me even in dreams. And I made a decision that seemingly was mine, but it was induced through her praying. I made a decision to get closer to God. And in getting closer to God, resisting the devil fled from our relationship. We're still together now, 32 years.
Thank you.
Anybody else wants to tag that before we move on? Is there anything else you go ahead, Joe, please.
My wife and I, we've been together, married 38 years. And I'll tell you this, love won't keep you together, but commitment will. It's about a covenant. And early on, we began to grow apart. But what we found, what my wife decided, a lot of it was on my shoulders, going the wrong direction, but she decided that we would not be a negative statistic. So rather than hanging out with her girlfriends and talking with them who had no wisdom, she pressed into her word, prayed for me, and I, as my understanding was enlightened as a result of her doing that, I got in my rightful place, and here we are together here and continue to press on and begin to help others. So He's no respecter of persons, but He is a respecter of faith. Amen.
Brother Joe, you hit the nail on the head, man. I'm telling you. Rather than listening to your peers, go to God and go to godly people.
Go ahead, Sam.
I want to add one more thing to this. I don't want to leave. I want to be sufficient in my explanation. It's also good that you find a mentor marriage. In our relationship, we at the very crucial moment, we bumped into a couple who had already gotten over that particular hump, and they were just slightly more mature than we were in Christ, and of course in their marriage. And we began to watch their model, and we spin off of that and grew. So it's good to have peer marriages as well.
So I'm going to draw a scenario out of that. So marriages don't get to that place. So we have couples. They're doing life. Life pulls them in directions, and everybody's so busy that sometimes it's, you lose the flame, you lose the spark. Everybody's just doing life, and you're not doing marriage. So if that's represents usually a lot in a congregation. That's just easy to happen. How many people have had it happen if it's not happening now? It just happens. You can drift. So here's longevity in marriage. So tell us, we're out here. We're in that state. What do we do? I mean, you got to find a starting point. That seems to be the hardest part. And the traditional, just praying about it, that's not enough. You can't just tell them to pray because it's got to be more than that. There has to be some practical steps that they can do. How do you freshen up a marriage? How do you get things back? How do you got kids, you got school, you got jobs, you got bills, you got the world, everything's going on. Yeah. How do you find the fire back in the marriage? Who wants to field that?
I'll start. One thing that I made a purpose in my heart to do, me and my wife was entangled in ministry, work, children, and just life in general. I made a conscious decision to date my wife. I made a conscious decision that every 4th month that I would take her out of town, maybe a 100-mile trip somewhere, Montgomery, Tallahassee, and I would date her. I didn't treat her like my wife. I treated her like my girlfriend. I flirted with her the whole weekend. I didn't talk church. I didn't talk work. And as a matter of fact, I played like we didn't have kids. Because a lot of times, first of all, men are physical and women are emotional. And when we go through life, worldly things begin to pull on those, and a wife can seem to come home and treat me like another wifely duty. And I could handle her like another piece of physical thing. So I chose to take my wife off, rekindle the flame, talk about the things we talked about before we got married, created new conversations and a new bond, and by that we created a new fire.
That's good. I like that, Fred.
I want to piggyback off of what Minister Fred said. That is absolutely true. But what we hear a lot of times is in young marriages especially, that you can't go 100 miles away. You can't afford to. It's not in your budget at that time. So there are a lot of simple things that you can do. He said the word date. You continue to date. We talk to couples a lot of times that when we ask them, when have you been on your last date? Well, we don't. We got football. We have this. We have all of these things that he mentioned and more. So find some time. It needs to be a part of your schedule. Just like you schedule church, just like you schedule a doctor's appointment, just like you schedule football and basketball and all those things, you need to be on the calendar for one another. And you need to do something exciting and different. Google has a lot of things on there. Clean, nice things. Just take a walk in the park. That's a date. That's some time apart where you don't talk about work, you don't talk about the kids. As Fred said, you rekindle the flame. Talk like you did when you were dating. That dating process should never end. Women, fix yourselves up.
Amen.
Hold on just a second.
Dress.
Yeah, hold on. Leave that right there.
Roz,
Leave it right there. This is we're being sincere here. Now, Roslyn said a mouthful right there. And I just want to address it because it's so important. Now listen, I'm going to speak to both sides here. You know, just because you get older doesn't mean you can't make an effort to take care of yourself. Okay? We're all getting older, but we can take care of ourselves. When you're sitting around the house, it doesn't have to look like you combed your hair with a weed eater on either side. All right, your toothbrush works on the weekends too. Come on, everybody. Both sides. I'm talking both sides here. That's true. You know, I mean, you know, it's hard to find love up against a sweaty, stinky body. I mean, just, you know, I mean, you can take a bath, just, I mean, before you hang out. Can I just be real for a minute? You know, that's one thing that I do appreciate about my wife, and I know she appreciates that about me. Is, you know, we're real funny that way. We don't like to get around each other when we smell. It's just a thing. You know, and that's just, you may think it's a little thing, but it's a big thing to some folks. It's a big thing to me. You know what I mean? So I'm just seriously saying that because I'll guarantee you when you guys were courting each other, you stand in that mirror for 30 minutes making sure everything was right. So what you're saying when you get married is, well, I don't care about you as much as I did before I married you. So that's really, I just can't let that one get out. That is so good right there, okay? You go ahead, Russ. I'm sorry.
Men are physical, as Fred said. That something, I guess, you know, I don't know. That's the way they were created. Bishop probably can explain that to you, but I just know they are. I don't know all the understandings behind it, but I know that they are, and they are turned on by sight. So we need to make sure every once in a while, throw in a different hairdo, throw in a different outfit. Not only that, I hear and I have mentioned to women, what does your husband like? If he doesn't like your hair short, if he likes your hair long, then you might need to wear your hair long. Because if not, then remember, they are turned on by sight. You're going to force him to look at someone else that has long, pretty hair. That's just the truth.
We are visual creatures. There's two principles that you can add to all this. Your priorities in life. What are your priorities? Am I prioritizing my time with my spouse, my children? You know, am I making my wife or my husband a priority like I used to? Another thing is, you know, it's easy to exhaust words to your spouse that are hurtful or that are critical, and you can make your spouse feel like there's nothing they can do right. Oh my goodness, that is such a turnoff. So the last thing you want to hear is that person open their mouth. Make it a point and a habit every single day to remind your spouse how special they are to you, how much you love them, how beautiful they are. You know, be more complimenting than critical to your spouse. That should, the balance of the words you speak to your spouse are so important. Most of your words should be uplifting, encouraging. You do that, and they realize he's got my heart, she's got my heart. The fire is just going to stoke that much higher. I promise you.
One thing, too, that our pastors have taught us, and I took it and it really worked in our marriage, is try to outdo one another. Outserve. Not outdo, outserve. Outserve one another. So what we do a lot of times when we are ministering to couples is we give them assignments, and we want them to outserve one another. So one week, the husband takes the wife out. The next week, the wife takes, and it's a contest. So who did the best? So you're out serving one another. And if you keep that going, it's always something exciting. I mean, it's just, I'm always trying to, you know, one-up him.
Yeah. Another thing, and I believe in pouring into our kids, but before there were any kids, there were you two. And so we seem to forget the relationship when we have kids. And so when you begin to neglect, that's when the drying up begin to happen. So you can keep the fire in by not neglecting each other. There was you two before there was any kids, so you have to keep that in mind.
A way to look at what he's talking about is consider who you're with, why you love them, why you were attracted to them. And then remember that they were actually a person before they met you with dreams and hopes. Something that me and my wife do is we encourage one another in our gifts and our talents. I'm an artist, and through her encouragement, she's actually birthed something growing out of me, a business and things coming out of me. The things that I know about her is that a lot of people don't know is that she's a talented writer. And she'll sit and she'll watch Netflix if you let her. But I got her a laptop, sat it in her lap, and said, hey, all that writing you do, I've heard little bits that you've done. Give me something, show me something. And that began us back and forth, me showing her my art, her writing out her stories and reading them to me. And it was showing that I was interested in her and her dreams and the things that she wants to be, because those things are still attainable. They just get sidetracked from kids and work and all the other things. But anything is possible. And if you keep that in mind, that anything is possible between the both of you, you might head towards doing something together and stop working and doing what you're doing. And, you know, it could birth anything. But just encourage their gifts and their talents, too.
Astro, I want to throw to you because I think if anyone here is going to know about the kid thing, it's probably going to be you, you know, because I mean, let's just talk about it. Kids are hard sometimes. They're the most wonderful thing, but wow, they just take, it's just constant full time. So how do you divvy that up and still find time for that spark in the marriage? Help us there.
For us, and like he said, we do got 6 kids for people that do not know. But dating, like they said, is important. Putting it in our schedule. One of the big things that we do, we're always doing for each other. He said it best, like the one-up. And so my birthday is coming up, and I have literally received gifts in the mail almost every day, the month of November. And it's small things, but it's things that I love. And so one of the things that we do, my husband is very creative, and so he may write down a bunch of activities, and he say, hey, pick one of those activities that you want to do. And so it could be horseback riding. It can be a bunch of different things, because one of the things that we realize when you have kids and you're doing life and not marriage, sometimes you know, sweet potato pie may no longer be his favorite food, but you don't know that because you're so just kind of involved with the kids, and you're doing everything. You know everything about the kids, but you no longer know anything about your spouse. And I think the most embarrassing thing I've ever, is being with a couple and somebody say, oh yeah, my wife likes spaghetti. And the wife is looking like, I liked spaghetti like 15 years ago. But if you would have been, literally, like, it happens. And so we do things like, hey, what is your favorite? We try to send texts throughout the day. He's very, like she said, physical. He's like, man, babe, you look fine today. And I laugh because it's so funny, because we are 2 different people, but that is, and so it starts from the time we wake up. We try not to be, sometimes it is, but it's tough. But we try to mainly just focus on each other a lot of times as far as the things that he liked, the things that he likes for me to do. One of the things that I can remember the Lord shared with me, the Lord said, I want you to love him the way he wants to be loved. So many times we're loving a person the way that is comfortable for us.
Yeah.
And so that was tough for me because I was like, well, I'm not like that, and I'm not like that, and I'm not like that. But when you get in the face of God and he's giving you a man of God, then he's going to show you how to be his spouse. And so he teaches me how to be Alonzo's spouse with 6 kids. He teaches Alonzo how to be my spouse with 6 kids. And we do date, and we do have help, and I would like to give a shout out to Grace back there in the back, who's now watching one of the babies. And so we have those people in our life that says, hey, you guys go out. I heard on Roz earlier say, we make dates to the grocery store. Like, we go to the grocery store and we're like, hey, let's get this. It's the small things that count. We send the kids to bed early. Hey, don't come knock on this door. Listen, one of y'all better watch the other one. And we make it funny, and my kids think it's funny, but they understand the importance of our marriage. We do tell them that you're going to grandma's house, and when you come back from grandma's house, we're not only going to be better for each other, but we're going to be better for you guys. We like to say that to our kids because we never want them to think that they're not included, but sometimes you're not included so that we can be better for you. But that's one of the big things that we do. is that we do spend time together and we try to definitely pay attention to each other with the 6 kids involved. And sometimes it's like, hey, you stop talking, like I'm talking to your daddy right now. You know, and we do that, and you do have to do that, and it can be a lot. And I heard Marlon say, find out what your spouse's passion is. For those of you that know us, Alonzo has been to school, I go to school. And so there are seasons in our life where I'm supporting everything that he does, and I know my role, and I'm not bitter because of that, because I know the season that we're in. So know what season you're in, because if you don't, you'll start to resent your spouse. But at the same time, encourage your spouse to go after what God. When you see those talents, nurture those talents the same way you would your child. Because we see our child with gifts, and we're like, yeah, my child can play football, my child can do this, and we're going to go after it. We have kids with gifts and talents, but I do the same thing with my husband, and he does the same thing with me as well. And so that's huge, huge for us, is to definitely pay attention to each other. And we date. We do date each other, and we try to lift each other up as much as possible. There are even times, and I will say this, we do have time where he's like, babe, hey, you need to get away, I'll watch the kids. I know that's, some people may say, oh, I can't believe y'all do that, but we do. He's like, babe, you need a time by yourself. Go somewhere, call your friend, go somewhere. And I do the same thing for him, because that's important, because again, it makes us better. It makes him better because he gets the relief from the kids, and I'm like, I got this. And then he says, hey, you need to go, and we come back together, and it's a beautiful thing, because we recognize the other's needs over my own need. Because does he necessarily want to be at home with 6 kids? Absolutely not, but he'll do it for me. I'll do it for him, because we know that it's making each other better. And if we're better, other people, we can be that model that other people need in a world that is getting divorced. And we have been married 18 years, so that's one of the things.
Well, I'm going to have to jump in right here. Did you guys enjoy that tonight? We're out of time, and that's what we're going to do, is always leave you wanting more. Come on, put your hands together and just tell everybody what a good job they did up here. That's good.